People don't just believe in God because of tradition or because they were told to. The real reason is far stranger, and once you see it, you'll never look at faith the same way again. Why do people still believe in God? It seems like a simple question, but the real answer goes way deeper than tradition or morality. Because belief isn't just about ancient texts or Sunday rituals. It's about fear, comfort, survival, and the way the human brain is wired. Think about this. Lightning strikes, earthquakes, death itself. For most of history, no one had answers. And when our minds can't explain something, we invent an explanation. We tell a story. And over time, that story became God. But here's the twist. Even now, when science explains more than ever, billions still hold on. Why? What keeps belief alive in a world full of doubt? That's what this video will uncover. The psychology, the social glue, the hidden survival instincts that make faith so powerful. And here's why you'll want to keep watching. Once you understand why humans believe, you'll start seeing religion not as a mystery, but as a mirror. A mirror that shows us who we are, what we fear, and what we long for most. And the biggest paradox? Knowing why people believe might just free you to create meaning without needing belief at all. So let's break this down. Because the first reason is older than civilization itself. Fear of the unknown. Imagine being one of the first humans. The world around you is terrifying. Storms tearing across the sky, floods destroying everything, sickness striking without warning. No science, no medicine, no explanations. Your brain can't handle pure chaos. It needs a reason. So when lightning splits the night, you don't say, "It just happens." You say, "Someone caused that." And that's where gods enter the story. We're wired this way. Psychologists call it agency detection. If you hear a rustle in the bushes, your survival depends on assuming it's a predator, not the wind. Better safe than sorry. That instinct kept us alive, but it also made us see hidden agents everywhere. Agents behind the storms, behind the sun, behind death itself. And death is the ultimate unknown. Every animal dies, but only humans understand it's coming. That awareness is crushing. So we invent a story where death isn't the end. A protector, a plan, an afterlife. Suddenly, fear has a cushion, and that cushion is powerful enough to survive for thousands of years. But fear of the unknown isn't the only reason belief stuck. The real secret to why people still believe has less to do with storms and more to do with survival of the tribe. Death and the promise of more. There's one fear deeper than storms, deeper than chaos, deeper than anything else. The fear of not existing. Every human eventually realizes the same haunting truth. One day, life ends. Consciousness shuts off. Everything we are disappears. And here's the problem. Our brains can't even imagine it. Try right now to picture not existing. You can't. Your mind keeps trying to fill the silence with something. A dream, a tunnel, a light, anything but nothing. That mental blind spot makes the promise of an afterlife almost irresistible. Because belief in God doesn't just explain death, it rewrites it. Suddenly, there's a plan, a reunion, a second chance. Life isn't snuffed out, it continues forever. And that idea is so powerful, it can override almost any evidence. People will hold on to it fiercely, not because it's logical, but because it feels like the only way to make the unbearable bearable. That's why afterlife beliefs appear in almost every culture. Heaven, reincarnation, paradise, the details change, but the promise stays the same. Death isn't the end. But humans didn't just believe for themselves, they believed together. And that's where faith became more than comfort. It became survival, faith as social glue. Belief in God didn't just help people face storms or death. It did something even more practical. It kept people alive together. Think about early tribes. Life was brutal. Food was scarce. Strangers could be a threat. Survival depended on unity. And nothing unites faster than a shared story. If everyone in the group believed the same myths, performed the same rituals, and obeyed the same sacred rules, trust became easier. You weren't just another person, you were part of us. Religion became the original glue. It told people who belonged, what was allowed, and what happened if you stepped out of line. And when those rules came with divine authority, eternal reward, or eternal punishment, they were almost impossible to ignore. Before governments, before courts, there were gods. Gods that made rules sacred. Gods that made disobedience dangerous. And here's the clever part. Belief wasn't just enforced from the outside. It lived inside people's heads. If you thought a god was watching you 24/7, you didn't need guards at every corner. The guard was already in your mind. This invisible lawmaker turned small tribes into stable societies. But it also shaped the way our brains see the world, in ways we still carry today. Because once you start seeing intent everywhere, you can't unsee it. The brain's pattern machine. The human brain is a pattern-making machine. It has to be. Hear a rustle in the grass. Is it the wind or a predator? If you assume a predator and you're wrong, you just wasted a second. But if you assume wind and you're wrong, you're dead. So evolution gave us a bias. Better to see intention where there is none than to miss danger that's real. This survival instinct is called hyperactive agency detection. We don't just see patterns, we see agents behind them. Beings with purpose, with power. Apply that to thunder, earthquakes, plagues, or even life itself, and suddenly you're surrounded by invisible forces. Agents that cause, control, punish, reward. Gods. And once your brain is wired to see intent everywhere, almost any coincidence feels meaningful. A prayer answered. A dream that seems to come true. A lucky escape. We connect the dots, even when the picture isn't really there. This pattern seeking is powerful, but it comes with a cost. It makes belief in the supernatural feel natural, even automatic. And here's the twist. Even when knowledge grows, the instinct doesn't vanish. Which is why belief isn't just about what we know, it's about what we feel. And when life gets painful, feelings almost always win over facts. Emotional survival, rational truth. Humans like to think we're rational, that we believe things because they're true. But when life gets painful, logic almost always takes a back seat. Think of the person who just lost someone they love. In that moment, what's stronger? The scientific explanation of how bodies fail, or the belief that their loved one still exists somewhere? Belief offers comfort when reality feels unbearable. It doesn't matter if it's provable, it feels like oxygen when you're drowning. That's why phrases like, "everything happens for a reason," spread so easily. They don't solve the chaos of life, but they soothe it. And this is the secret edge religion has always had over reason. Facts explain. Belief heals. That's why people cling to faith, even when evidence stacks up against it. Because when survival of the psyche is at stake, comfort beats accuracy. And here's where the conflict deepens. Once faith is tied to survival, not just physical, but emotional, it stops being a choice of ideas. It becomes part of who you are. And that's why leaving isn't just about rejecting beliefs. It feels like rejecting yourself, belief as identity. For many people, faith isn't just what they think, it's who they are. It's the prayers they learned as children, the holidays they celebrated with family, the community they grew up in. Belief is woven into identity, and that makes it powerful and nearly impossible to walk away from. Because questioning your faith isn't like changing your mind about politics or science. It feels like betraying your parents, your culture, your roots. It feels like betraying yourself. This is why doubt can be so terrifying. Even if the logic doesn't add up, even if the contradictions become too obvious, leaving faith can feel like stepping into exile. And the social cost is just as heavy. In many communities, being religious signals trustworthiness. Admitting disbelief can make you an outsider overnight. Family tension, lost friendships, even hostility. So people cling tighter, not because the evidence supports their faith, but because their whole identity does. And here's the catch. Once a belief fuses with identity, it gains armor. It becomes resistant to change. Which leads us straight into the next reason faith survives, the mental tricks our brains play to keep it alive. Cognitive biases that lock faith in. Once belief becomes part of identity, the brain steps in to defend it. Not with evidence, but with bias. The strongest one is confirmation bias. We notice what supports our belief and ignore what doesn't. If someone prays and recovers, it's a miracle. If they pray and nothing changes, it's God's will. Either way, the belief survives. Then there's pattern seeking. We hate randomness, so we invent order. A lucky coincidence feels like a sign. A dream that lines up with reality feels like destiny. We connect dots that aren't really connected and call it proof. And maybe the most powerful bias of all, motivated reasoning. We don't start neutral and then weigh the facts. We start with the conclusion, God exists, and then search for reasons to justify it. Any contradiction? Reframed as a test of faith. That's why debates about religion rarely change minds. Because the more a belief is challenged, the more the brain doubles down to protect it. In a way, faith is built like a fortress, with defenses that grow stronger the more they're attacked. But bias alone isn't enough to keep belief alive for centuries. There's another force at play, power. And that changes everything. Power and control. Belief doesn't just shape individuals. It shapes entire societies. From the beginning, leaders realized something. If you control what people believe about eternity, you control how they live today. Religion became more than comfort. It became authority. Kings claimed divine rights. Priests declared rules as God's will. Disobey the ruler, and you weren't just breaking a law, you were defying heaven itself. That's a level of power no human authority alone could ever match. And it wasn't only external control, it was internal. If you grow up believing an all-seeing being watches your every move, even your thoughts, you don't just obey rules, you police yourself. You judge your neighbors. The system sustains itself without needing guards at every corner. This self-replicating code made religion one of the most effective tools of social control in history. Empires rose on its back. Wars were fought in its name. And even today, laws and politics are shaped by beliefs written thousands of years ago. But here's the surprising part. Even with all this control, religion should have collapsed as knowledge grew. Why didn't it? Because belief isn't static. It adapts. And that's why it's still here. The adaptability of faith. If religion had stayed the same since the beginning, it would have died long ago. But belief has a survival trick. It adapts. Ancient people thought gods pushed the sun across the sky. Later, they said God designed the laws of physics. When miracles became harder to defend, they became metaphors. When dogma grew too rigid, it softened into personal faith. This is what philosophers call the God of the gaps. Wherever knowledge hasn't reached, belief rushes in to fill the silence. 1,000 years ago, almost everything was a gap: storms, disease, eclipses. Today, science explains those mysteries. But new gaps always remain. Why is there something instead of nothing? What started the universe? Why are we conscious at all? And that's where belief hides now, in the spaces science hasn't touched yet. It's like a shadow that retreats but never fully disappears. Because for many people, faith isn't really about evidence, it's about need. And even as organized religion declines, those needs don't vanish, they just take on a new form. Which is why so many people today describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. Spirituality without religion. Even as traditional religion loses followers, belief doesn't vanish, it changes shape. More and more people today call themselves spiritual but not religious. They reject strict institutions, ancient dogmas, and rigid hierarchies, but they still hold on to the idea of something bigger. Why? Because the needs behind belief haven't disappeared. The need for comfort, the need for meaning, the need for connection. Spirituality offers all of that without the rules. Instead of holy books, people turn to meditation, energy, or personal rituals. Instead of eternal punishments, they focus on inner peace. It feels freer, more flexible, more personal, and for many, it's a way to keep the mystery alive without the weight of organized religion. But here's the fascinating part. Even stripped of temples and doctrines, the psychology is the same. We're still searching for patterns, still creating stories, still finding comfort in forces we can't prove. That reveals the truth at the core of this entire journey. Belief in God, or in something like God, isn't just about tradition, it's about being human. And that leads us to the biggest question of all. If belief comes from human needs, can we create meaning without it? So why do people still believe in God? Not because of perfect evidence, not because of logic that can't be broken, but because belief answers the questions we fear most. It eases the terror of death. It bonds us together. It comforts us when life hurts. And it shapes our identity so deeply that letting go can feel like losing ourselves. Belief survives not because it explains reality better, but because it feels better. And once you see that, faith stops looking like a mystery and starts looking like a mirror reflecting what makes us human, our fears, our longings, and our need for meaning. But here's the bigger question. If belief in God is built from human needs, what happens when we stop believing? Can life still feel meaningful in a universe with no script, no plan, and no guarantees? That's exactly what we'll explore in the next video. For now, if this gave you a new perspective, do one simple thing: subscribe. Not for dogma, not for blind belief, but for more questions worth asking. Because once you understand why people believe, you're ready to ask the harder question: what do we believe instead?